Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. This is the Lowe House 2025 Virtual Awards Ceremony. You're joined today by myself. I'm Amani Freeman, the Exhibitions Manager for the Maryland Federation of Art. We're also joined by one of our wonderful gallery assistants, Miss Julie Oakes. So just a few words on what it is we do as an organization. The MFA is a visual nonprofit organization that hosts more than 40 exhibitions every year. Our mission is to make connections in the local and online communities through art, with exhibitions and events in Circle Gallery in Annapolis, Maryland, online and in numerous alternative venues. We provide artists of all genres, media, and backgrounds with the opportunity to exhibit work selected by professionally credentialed jurors and to be recognized with monetary awards. You do not have to be a member to join our exhibitions. However, members do have several advantages, such as lesser entry fees, access to networking and additional exhibition opportunities. And if you're interested in learning more and becoming a member, please visit our membership page on our website to find out more. Now, just a few words about the exhibition that we're going to be going over today. The Maryland Federation of Art has been invited to exhibit artwork at the Lowe House of Delegates building in Annapolis, Maryland. Any original 2D work created through any media which followed exhibition guidelines was eligible for entry. The selected works will be on exhibit at the Lowe House of Delegates building during the 2025 legislative session from January 13th to April 8th. We did have to push back the opening due to the weather of the past week, but it's still going to go through to the end of session. So, we're also lucky to be joined here today by our juror, Miss Leora Maltz-Leca. She's a professor of contemporary art at Rhode and curator of contemporary projects and founder of Redwood Contemporary Arts Initiative. Miss Maltz-Leca specializes in contemporary art, particularly how artists from the post-colonies and the global South challenge and reshape late modernist hierarchies, assumptions, and dogmas. At Rhode, she teaches courses on global modernism, materiality, race, and critical theory, while also leading seminars that connect students with diverse perspectives from artists, art historians, and critics. Her published works include Process as a Metaphor and Other Doubtful Enterprises, and the upcoming Material Politics, which investigates the metaphorical and political dimensions of artistic materials and processes, with a focus on their historical and cultural significance. And at this point, I'm going to pass over the floor to our juror, who's going to say a few words in introduction.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for that introduction, Amani, and thank you to everyone who's here on this Sunday afternoon. I just want to say that it was a real pleasure to be invited to juror this exhibition. It was really interesting and enlightening to look through all the works, and I had a really tough time choosing them, but I was so impressed with the diversity of media and material and imagery. And yeah, I think in the end, this is going to be a really eclectic, unusual exhibition with just a lot of different kinds of work and different kinds of projects. So thank you so much to all the artists who participated and for entrusting me with the very tough process of trying to juror this show. So the first honorable mention is for this beautiful photograph by Rolf Blessing, Zion's Reflections, which I thought the color and the light and the composition of this work were really just fantastic and very unusual. It seems very painterly, and the cutoff, the way that the figure is cut off and just sort of, implicated and almost dancing through the image, along with these kinds of fields of color. And the pattern-like material and the way that they're arranged, I thought this photograph was really interesting and just really worked with light and reflection and color in a very beautiful way. So I was very impressed with this piece and definitely thought it deserved an honorable mention. This collage I thought was wonderful. I know this artist submitted several pieces which were clearly sort of part of the same, the logic being explored in the work was very evident. But yeah, I thought this was constructed in a really muscular way. It's a strong work. The composition and arrangement of forms is very bold. And I like the spontaneity and organicism of the marks and the use of color. And the way that it made a kind of very strong abstract statement, and yet also seemed to be very sort of cellular and organic, both in the way in which it's produced and made, but also in the effect that it gives. So yeah, I thought that this was a really lovely work and just a really wonderful example of a monotype and of, the way that they can be really loose and expressive and painterly. And it had a freshness that I thought was really wonderful. So yes, I very much like this work too. This photograph, Urban Reflection by Tom Marchessault, I presume that's how you pronounce the name, or however they pronounce it, I thought was really lovely. Also a digital photograph, but again, I thought this photographer worked with reflection in an absolutely masterful way. The play of not only light and pattern, but also the strict geometry of the work. But the way that kind of very strong grid and the very strong horizontal black linear elements are kind of melted away, and the way that the light hits these buildings and sort of kind of seems to melt and disappear, and almost possess a kind of liquidity and fluidity that plays against what we know to be these very solid buildings, I thought was very compelling. So yeah, so it seemed to reference, Bauhaus histories of photography and a strong history of geometry, particularly in black and white photography, but also give it a kind of contemporary update with this sort of deliquescence or seeming melting of the form. So I thought that this was a really wonderful piece too, that definitely also deserved an honorable mention. Then I think the last honorable mention, or maybe there was another one, I can't remember, but this went to Pat O'Brien for this gorgeous drawing, which was charcoal and graphite on paper and seemed to be quite large, 20 by 20. I thought that the detail and the observation and the care and slowness that it must have taken to do this work was very, very impressive. The detail of the flowers and the forms, particularly when viewed up close, was extremely intricate and beautiful. But then I liked also how they weren't just kind of put in a conventional vase. The composition's a bit unusual. Parts of them apparently seem to be dying and wilting and kind of falling all over the place, as if to give a sense of the process of drawing and making and how long that might be taking. And I also really liked the drama of placing this against that very dark, inky background, but we did not get a huge amount of drawing. And, drawing is a very time-consuming and not always sort of the sexiest of mediums. And so I just really had a lot of respect for this artist to take the care and spend the time to do something that's considered a kind of traditional medium, and which is very time-consuming. But in this case, I feel like really merited and it needed the time and care that was put in and produced this really beautiful drawing that is different. As gorgeous as the photographs are, I think that this particular image could not have been done in any other media, and so it was really wonderful to have to see work in drawing, and I definitely thought that it merited an honorable mention. And then I guess this one was the last honorable mention, also a photograph by Will Scott, State House Dome. Again, I thought this was just a beautifully finished, centered, almost professional looking piece. The composition is simple and yet extremely bold and striking, and there's just a wonderful sense of contrast in this photograph between these very bold elements, such as the gold and the circular aspects, along with tiny, tiny, tiny delicate detail that you see both up in the ceiling, but also in the other parts. So yeah, this was just an image that read really beautifully. I think it must take a great deal of skill to get the lighting and the detail and everything in this image so perfect. And so I thought that this was an unusual perspective and a really lovely photograph too. Then on to third place. Yes, this is also a photograph by Sandra Kauffman. I thought these photos were just absolutely beautiful. Again, I remember that there were several entries by this artist, all of which were gorgeous. And I think I could only include works by no more than 2 works by each artist. Otherwise, I certainly would have included them all. But I remember looking at this body of work and thinking it was really interesting. This particular image, Cantina, really stuck with me just because of the boldness of the composition. I mean, this dividing line, this dividing architectural feature, I presume it's a door, is extremely dramatic, but you have a very complex image where you have foreground, background, middle ground, all working together really beautifully. And the colors and the forms in the constructed collaged image and the actual image being photographed, again, by some kind of serendipity, also mirroring each other and speaking to each other in these cactus forms, but also in terms of the kind of oranges here and then in the background. So you have 3 different scales of space, all juxtaposed in a way that looks extremely painterly and comes together as an image, as a photograph, I thought, in a really beautiful way. So yeah, I was very impressed with this work. The color is just marvelous. The composition is bold, and I thought it was a very interesting perspective. One sees a lot of photographs, and this one really sort of stood out as being really a kind of masterful engagement with the medium. And so, yeah, so this was definitely one that I very, very much liked and appreciated for all it has going on in it. This piece was second place by John Allen. This is a digital collage, but this and the other work that the artist submitted were both really, really beautiful, and seemed to come out of a kind of very creative juxtaposition of multiple kinds of objects and images. There seemed to be a deep sense of engagement with paleontology and various kinds of vintage image making, old photographs, fossil records, different ways in which images have been imprinted on substances, whether rocks, petrified, et cetera, like that over the years. But yeah, there seems to be a kind of real interest in looking at different registers of imaging, both natural and circumstantial, but then also juxtaposing them in this very adept graphic way. The color range, the tonality, the composition of this work, I thought was really lovely, and interesting and unusual, as was the subject matter. And so, yeah, I found myself coming back to this piece a lot. There's something created about the play of the composition among the forms, this kind of snail-like form, and then these circular forms here, and the way, although it looks as if it all kind of comes together very quickly, I imagine that there must have been a lot of playing around in order to get this kind of compositional rhythm. And so as an image, I thought that this was just really beautifully done, and deserved second place. And then moving on to first place was this mosaic work by Melanie Berry, titled When the Cow Was Free, which I confess I didn't quite understand the title of, but I was so impressed and so taken with the construction and detailed making of this work. The other work submitted alongside this was also just incredible. And when I looked at this work close up, again, the sense of time and patience and slowness and precision that went into making this work, with every single piece being matched, the sort of discipline, but also within that there was an enormous sense of rhythm and play and joy and all of those things. So yeah, I thought this mosaic was just really, really unusual and interesting, and seen it's none of these works really are done justice by images, but I imagine that seeing this work up close in person, or even just sort of zooming into it really, really close in a high resolution image, one could just see the incredible amount of work and beauty in so many, many corners of this piece. So as a piece, I felt that the richness and intricacy and complexity of this work, which bore witness to just hours and hours of very careful, assiduous making and matching and thinking and moving, that it was just a really, really marvelous example of a kind of just very impressive practice and eye. And so this work really stood out to me as something that was particularly extraordinary. There were many extraordinary works, but I think particularly the detailed making and processing and construction of this work and the way it bears evidence in the final piece really stood out for me, which was why I decided in the end that this piece deserved first place. And I think that's probably about it. And then here's the list. As you can see, there were, I would say, what is it, 3 or perhaps even 4 were digital photographs, which reflected in some ways the submissions. I would say, I'm not sure exactly the figures, Amani, but it seemed like a large proportion of the work submitted were photographs. Not that I was consciously working with a formula in the slightest, but I think that there were a lot of different photographs submitted, many of them which were digital, as well as a lot of sort of computer-generated digital imagery, which I was less interested in. But aside from, along with the photographs, mosaics, drawings, and a monotype, I think, also speak to the importance and continued investment in actual non-digital making in the studio and the kinds of, magic and beauty that can result from so-called, old-fashioned, time-consuming techniques. So yeah, I think that the submissions were really ranged across a lot of different kind of media and interests, and hopefully that's reflected in the final selection. But yeah, congratulations, everyone. And really just a wonderful body of work that I had the pleasure of looking through.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for your insight into the picks. It's clear that you definitely took your time looking through and considering a lot of things when making your selections. Not just for the exhibition, but for the awards as well. So we thank you so much for that. Um, th at this time, we usually open it up for Q&A from the artists, but I actually think I want to kind of jumpstart that and maybe it'll get them excited to talk. I know that we have a few award winners in here now. I won't call you out, but if there's no one talking, I just might. But I'll start the questions. So I think my first question is, did you internally have a theme when picking the show? Because I know for some of our exhibitions that are themed, it's kind of easier to say, okay, well, this is a theme, I'm sticking to it. But for this exhibition, it was kind of broad in terms of the selection. So when you were going through, did you develop a theme or did you kind of go into it with a kind of idea for what you wanted the exhibition to look like?
No, I mean, I did not go into it with any kind of theme at all, which would have made it interesting, but I think in some ways, it would have been easier and more difficult, I think, both because if you have a theme, then it can be sort of an easy limit to just sort of make decisions with or use as a guideline. I was really just looking at work that I thought, pulling out things that I thought were particularly compelling and interesting and thoughtful and unusual, and that I, as a viewer walking through, the State House would want to stop and pause at. So I did not have any kind of theme, and then as I narrowed it down, because I had to go sort of through a couple of rounds to try and whittle things down. The only, I would say that there wasn't really any kind of strong theme that emerged. except perhaps for, I think things could be arranged in terms of the landscape and nature, or buildings and architecture, things in the outside world people are looking at. I would say that overall there was more naturalistic work than abstract work. But really, it was just a question of kind of looking at each piece individually, without a theme. So that will be up to you all to install it. And I think that there are a lot of relationships that certainly could be. There's a lot of threads that could be drawn through, but I'm not sure if there's one single thread that would really pull everything together neatly, which is good.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say in some ways I think that's gonna make it interesting that we'll have like clusters of things that are
Totally.
familiar and
Yeah.
then all together it'll come together to kind of
Yeah.
coalesce and make one thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have a question from one of our artists, Miss Sonia Michelle. She said, "I'm curious about the term materiality in the titles of your publications. As someone who works in collage and assemblage of everyday stuff, I try to engage very much with the material world, and I wonder if that's what you have in mind."
Yeah, certainly materiality has a lot of different meanings, and probably everyone who uses it, there's a lot, in their artist statement or in a title of something means something slightly different by it. I mean, certainly the sense in which you're thinking about materiality is absolutely valid and correct. I think the artist who I'm looking at, I should probably make my title a bit clearer, because I'm actually looking at artists who use very unusual or wayward materials such as sugar or rum or cocoa, or things that are often industrial products, things that have long histories of trade. And so I've been focusing a little bit on that and the kind of turn to non-artistic materials, or art materials that have not traditionally been used for art, such as Kara Walker's Sphinx that she did, for instance, several years ago, when she made an enormous sculpture out of sugar and molasses, so that the sugar and molasses started melting, and it had a very distinctive, unusual kind of sickly smell. And that was, of course, in a sugar factory, but there the materiality being used and the history of the building and the history of the sugar trade and the US involvement in sugar and the trade in enslaved peoples were all very much evident in the materiality of the work, irrespective of the content, so that the materiality kind of really held a lot of content, if that makes sense.
No, mentioning it like that, I've never thought of it in that way, so thank you for shedding that light. Do any other artists have any questions for Miss Leora? Miss Berry, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question about your piece that won first place. I know,
Thank you. I'm very excited.
yeah, no, congratulations. I know last year in the Low House exhibition, you had a similar piece in terms of the mosaic, and it had a deeper meaning. So I just wanted to ask you, is this piece follow suit, or is it just something that you found aesthetically pleasing and that's why you did it?
Well, this is one of about 25 pieces that I've made on a similar theme. I've been working with these plates that are from about 1900 that have illustrations from Charles Dana Gibson. And so they're about, women's roles. And the reference to when the cow is free, that's a reference to why buy the milk when the cow is free, which is, one of the things I heard growing up. And, it's just, so all of this work is about some aspect of women's lives that really hasn't changed in 100 years. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, no, I was just the title, I couldn't logic from the title to what was being depicted, so I'm just glad that you shed some light on that.
Well, and then if the plates, that question about materiality, that's sort of like objects that are made usually for women as consumers, and so they often reflect interests that are supposedly appeal to women. And so it's interesting, collecting plates, the ones that I find, and if you look at these, you'll find the words to wedding vows. There are images of rings. So it's sort of about, and then that comment, why buy the milk when the cow is free, is, it's about, that's what girls were told to admonish them to, wait until they were married, to be sexually active. So
Okay.
that's what this piece is about.
Well, thank you so much for your work and congratulations again on your award.
I
Thank
have
you.
a question for Melanie too, if I might follow up. Melanie, it's like lovely to meet you in person, and this
Thank you.
work is so fantastic. And thank you for that context. It's really interesting. I guess I was curious. I have two questions really, and the first is I was wondering. It doesn't say what material this is on, whether it's on board or canvas, or I was just curious about the materiality of it. And then my second question was whether you have a background as a ceramicist or whether you came to this from another angle or route.
They're made with Ouija board, which is something that's usually made for installing showers.
Okay.
And it's like a styrofoam that has cement on either side. So they're made with thin set adhered to Ouija board.
Interesting.
My background is I have a background in sculpture.
Okay.
And then had I have an undergraduate degree in sculpture and a graduate degree in film, and I made films for a few years, but sort of over decades of raising children and things like that, kind of lost touch with that. You have to really kind of have a way to make films,
Yeah.
but materials around the house, and I've just always liked to construct things. So even when I made films, they were just made by putting together lots of disparate images because I never planned them. They just flow. And that's the same with the mosaics. I don't really start with an idea exactly about what it's going to be about, but I do sort of pick certain plates based on either color or the kind of images. I try to repeat certain images throughout.
Well, that's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I can kind of see it. Film has, montage, and this is sort of collage and piecing together in a way. But yeah, this is really painterly, I think. I'm struck by the painterliness of it. But it's interesting. It's interesting to hear of your background. It all kind of flows together, I guess. But that's really interesting. Well, all I can say to Melanie and to all of you is just please keep making your work. Even as you shift to different media and different topics and different things, it's just really, it's not only is the work just so impressive to look at, but again, when one begins to understand the complexity and the ideas that go into it, which I think I've just really skimmed the surface, but there is so much thought and intelligence and so many fascinating ideas in this work that it's just really, really wonderful to see. So yeah, just an amazing grouping of creativity and talent and intelligence in this exhibition.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that we can definitely count on our members for is to bring forth really good work. Very robust, diverse selections, and that's one thing we're really grateful for. A few people are commenting things in the chat. I'm just going to read them off so they're not one to miss. Pat O'Brien just says, "Thank you so much, Miss Leora, for selecting my work. I'm truly honored." And she congratulated Melanie on her mosaic, said it is spectacular. Miss Erin Hammond says, "Echoing Pat's sentiment, thank you for selecting my work, and congratulations to all the winners and honorable mentions." Miss Esperanza says, "Grateful my work was selected." And Miss Kathleen says the same thing. She just says, "Thank you for selecting her work." So I think if no one has any other questions, that's actually a pretty good place to end it. I just kind of wanted to echo what they're saying as well. Thank you so much for all the work you've done. From when I first reached out to you up until today, you've been nothing but a pleasure to work with, a real supreme professional. You can tell that you know what you're doing, and you took time selecting our exhibition and just making it special. So we're really grateful for that. Thank you so much to all the artists who applied, even if you didn't get in. Thank you so much for even choosing to take the time to apply and to have the chance to be exhibited with us. As you all know, we have a lot of opportunities. So if you didn't get into this one or win an award, please look forward to our calendar to have a chance to maybe, get into another exhibition. But at this point, I'm just gonna invite Miss. Oh, well, I have one comment from Mr.
Well, it's a question. Can you share with us where in the building this gallery is?
Yeah, sure. So are you familiar with the Lowe House building at all?
I am. I've had pictures there, so yes, I am.
Okay, so in the past we had two hallways. We had the hallway that was I think by a library, and then there's a long hallway, and then there's another hallway that are by the offices. In this case, we have that whole long hallway, which is why we were able to exhibit double the work that we normally have because we have more space. So when you come in and you pass the library and take a left, there's a long hallway and it's going to be 80 works along that hallway.
Thank you.
Amani, I just want to jump in and say thank you so much for inviting me to juror this show. It's been a real honor, a real pleasure. I've been so impressed by the work, and thank you, Amani and Juliana, for doing this work with the Maryland nonprofits. It's just really wonderful to give artists the opportunity to show their work in what sounds like in a really wonderful location, and it's just really, really important work that you do to support artists. So very, very honored and happy to have been included in this.
Well, again, thank you so much for everything you've done, and we're really grateful for it. So I just want to say thank you to everyone that took the time today to join. If you didn't get a chance or you want to watch it back, we will be uploading it to YouTube, so look out for that. And everyone have a great, great, great rest of your Sunday. Take care, everyone.